Welcome back to Man versus Machine. I'm Bradley Stalder at FF Stalder on the X, and Ryan Reynolds joining me at Ryan Reynolds NFL. Ryan, it's great to be back with you here on Man versus Machine. How have you liked the last couple of days, last few weeks of preseason? It's been a lot of information. The news desk has been humming.
Yeah, man, cranking up the work volume. It's draft season for most people. For sickos like us, it's been draft season for months, but for the overwhelming majority of football enthusiasts, like now's the time for them. Looking forward to maybe giving them some good insights.
Yes, it was kind of hard to prepare for the show, Ryan. The premise of this show is we're going to talk about a couple flag plant players and a couple late round sleeper picks to help win you your fantasy league. And especially given that this is the big weekend coming up, Ryan, I anticipate that this is going to be a heavily anticipated show. People want to know who we are taking stances on. We're also going to discuss Bo Nix, in this podcast because he was just named the starter for the Denver Broncos. But this is going to be a podcast where we're looking at from a bird's eye view, from maybe we have to put on our casual lenses, unfortunately, sometimes, because as Ryan and I have been doing all offseason. We've been drafting, we've been competing, we've been in different rooms, in different platforms, and comparing ADPs. We've seen the trends, and we've had our exposures. That's another thing that like volume drafters will tend to do, is have varying exposures. And even if you're one of those like dagger strategy type of drafters where you'll take like 60% of a grouping of players to start, like that's one strategy. You're still wanting to get rotated exposure on certain players just in case you're wrong, but these are players that Ryan and I are flag planting. We say these are our guys at the beginning of the drafts, usually within the first 6 rounds ish or so, that we're looking to make sure we get on our squads. And then we'll give 2 flag plants and 3 sleepers each. The sleepers will be round 11 ADP on FFPC. So before we get into the flag plants and sleepers, Ryan, I hinted at Bo Nix being named the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos. It seemed to be trending that way throughout the offseason. He earned the first round draft capital. He was a top 12 selection in the NFL draft. He played at Oregon, had some nice numbers coming out of Oregon, but there were also some underlying question marks of is his play going to translate to the NFL? And he made Sean Payton a believer. So now we fast forward a few months. It's no longer April. It's August 21st. Bo Nix is the starting quarterback for Denver. But we look at the ADPs, Ryan. The first Denver Bronco off the board on Underdog Fantasy is Courtland Sutton at 94th overall. Do you take this as an indication that not just that the market is not high on the Denver Broncos, but that the market's just not high enough on Bo Nix?
No, I think from a passing perspective, I think everything's the right way here for the Denver Broncos passing attack. I'm sure we'll get to Nix in a bit. Someone has to catch passes there. That's a pretty basic reality. Courtland Sutton's a red zone threat too. You can give him a 50-50 ball. I don't really even take him at current ADP for the most part. I skip him. So not a whole lot of interest, honestly.
Yeah, Courtland Sutton was a player that Jeremiah Retzlaff and I discussed on a previous podcast as a desperation bridge wide receiver. So typically how we've been drafting is you've been drafting wide receivers very heavily at the beginning of your drafts. And then you start taking your zero RB, or maybe you went anchor RB, and you had been hammering at about 94th overall. That's where you're getting some of the running backs that are very interesting, that have high upside, but do have high risk, but they can still access major ceiling. And we identified that Courtland Sutton was one of those players that if you decide to go running back heavy, or quarterback, tight end, etc., you were heavy on those positions that you were finding yourself having to draft a Courtland Sutton at that spot. Is that something you've experienced? Or, I mean, you said you were mostly avoiding him, but have you felt yourself in this position this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, when you draft with volume of any kind, like there's some drafts where, it's round 5 and you literally don't want another wide receiver on the board for the rest of the draft. So yeah, I've definitely taken him in those spots. But again, there's running backs I'd rather have in that range. There's quarterbacks I'd rather have in that range. So by and large, I'm passing. But yeah, of course, like in any situation, I definitely have some Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, to give an idea, Courtland Sutton is going 94th overall. Some of the running backs in that space have been Jaylen Warren, who just suffered, a hamstring injury. He's very questionable for week 1. Jonathan Brooks is in that spot. I like Jonathan Brooks a lot.
Yeah.
He's an honorable mention on my flag plants. Uh, Unfortunately, he doesn't make the list, but he is one of the players that I like in this spot. Tony Pollard is another player. I know you like Chase Brown around that spot as well. Brian Robinson, I don't mind. And then that kind of ties into a player not too far off, same offense, Javonte Williams, first running back off the board. We'll talk a little bit about Javonte and this scheme because he caught a lot of passes last year for Russell Wilson in Sean Payton's offense. We know that Payton schemes a lot of passes to the running back. What type of confidence are you approaching Javonte Williams, given you're not investing like a top pick in him? At the same time, there's been a lot of positive buzz about Julian McLaughlin's efficiency metrics from last year and Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame. How are you approaching Javonte?
I guess I kind of have to talk about the whole group a little bit. To me, veteran head coach and Sean Payton, rookie quarterback and Bo Nix. I don't think Audric Estime sees the field all that much, at least early in the season, because of that. I don't. I'd be surprised. With Williams, I think back to the mid Saints days for Payton. Pierre Thomas comes to mind. I've never viewed Javonte Williams like a game breaking talent, but he was a good player before his injuries, and you know primary runner, like you said, early down passing work. I especially on hero running back or zero running back teams where I need someone who's just going to play. I'm at least off the top of my head, I'm at least 8% on Williams on underdog.
Yeah, he's been a player that I've come around a little bit more on when it comes to like the PPR sites. On half PPR, it's kind of hard for me to get into. Like, I want him to score touchdowns, and I'm not convinced that the Denver Broncos offense is going to be scoring a ton of touchdowns given like our overall look at this market. The next wide receiver, so after Sutton, is Marvin Mims, and that's wide receiver 78, 181st overall. But Mims has not seemingly carved out a full role. We're concerned about his fit as well in this offense, given that he didn't break out last year with Russell Wilson under Sean Payton when they invested a second round pick. And now you get Bo Nix, who is check down king, right? So if you're going to have one deep threat, I think it's Courtland Sutton. So if we're struggling to get another wide receiver, Marvin Mims looks like he's not going to produce here in year 2. Is that how you're approaching him?
Yeah, I wasn't as high as people were on him last year. There were people putting him in the Hall of Fame already last season. Like I was not one of them. I think he still has a path to being a useful player, but like you said, Bo Nix, it's going to be a conservative offense most likely. They're not going to be throwing 12 passes a game, 50 yards downfield. They're going to try to protect their young quarterbacks. So yeah, I think I don't want to say the odd man out because that's probably not the exact way to frame it, but I don't think he really fits in what they're going to try to do for the most part.
Yeah, one of the wide receivers who does seem to have a role going very late in drafts is Tim Patrick, coming off of 2 season-ending injuries. He's very old, but he's a wily veteran and scored a touchdown in the preseason, very much running with the ones. If you're getting him for free at the end of drafts to stack, I mean, this is a player that maybe you can get a couple sprinkles in here and there. If you're at the last spot in your draft, why don't you take a player who's at least running with the ones from what we can tell? Tim Patrick now becomes a viable last round selection given his preseason usage. You agree?
Yeah, especially based on roster construction, like, especially on underdog, like, it's barren at wide receiver after like round 15. It's barren at round 15 at this point. But yeah, I think that's fair. Again, they're gonna probably, at least in the first half of the season, they're gonna surround Knicks with veterans as often as possible. And Tim Patrick's a professional football player, even though he's not the most exciting guy.
We do have a question in the comments, Ryan. We typically don't jump into the comments too much, but this is a good one from John Paul Taylor. He said, Knicks looked good, albeit the preseason. What happened to Troy Franklin? He tanked in the NFL draft and has literally done nothing in camp of preseason, not even with his college quarterback connection. So is Troy Franklin undraftable?
In your home league, yeah. In a tournament like the FFPC, like, maybe you think about it in the last round, but I'd probably say, I mean, we don't think Anthony Richardson's going to have a wildly above expected passer rate this year, right? So I'm fine with avoiding Franklin for now.
Yeah, Troy Franklin is a player that, we were hoping that maybe that Oregon connection would work, that it would be okay, shower narrative. I even went and talked about, the rankings of different narratives, shower narratives versus like going on vacation narratives. Certainly, something interesting to discuss at a later date. But let's talk about Bo Nix himself at this point, because Sean Payton has been looking for this type of quarterback that fits his system, really hitting into the checkdowns, making those strategic attacks downfield. And Bo Nix was that at Oregon. He ranked out of 142 qualified quarterbacks in college last year. Bo Nix ranked 129th in rate of passes attempted 20 or more yards down the field. It was just not the system that they were running at Oregon. And that's not the system that they're going to run here in Denver. So in my projections, I have Bo Nix at quarterback 21. I think he's going to get, he's going to be check down, high percentage throws, move the chains a little bit. But I think that what separates him from maybe you're talking like an Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr is the mobility. Like he's shown some athleticism, Ryan, and I think there's a little bit of juice to be had with Bo Nix compared to where the market has him at quarterback 27.
Yeah, I just have to say, wrong rookie quarterback wide receiver combo that I talked about before. I was actually meant Knicks, but these things happen. Third show today. I'll forgive myself. Now, I'll let me frame it to you this way. Last year, I had a pretty good amount of money on Shedeur Sanders through the Mojo platform. Made like $20,000 off of him. So I watched every Colorado game I could to figure out when to get off the track, basically. And I saw the Oregon game, and I didn't know who Bo Nix was before that. And I'm watching. I'm like, who is this guy? Because like you could tell that Oregon had a vastly superior roster to Colorado, but I saw something there. His rushing upside is what intrigues me for this season. I actually had an offensive rookie of the year bet on him from months ago at 30-1. He's like 10-1, 7-1 right now. I don't think he's going to win, but I do think whenever you can get a starting quarterback taken in the first round that's going to start on opening day, you got to pull the trigger on these situations. And like you said, ultimately in fantasy, maybe a good way to put this is better Tim Tebow. Does that make sense to you a little bit? Like, just from a fantasy perspective, he's going to run a little bit. Maybe better Taysom Hill, even if Taysom Hill was allowed to play quarterback every week. Same kind of deal. So not expecting 300-yard games in the air very often, but I do think he's going to have games where he has 200 yards passing and 60 on the ground, sometimes 40 on the ground on a touchdown.
Look, we'll take that for fantasy. I have Bo Nix projected as the 18th most rushing yards among quarterbacks, and I feel like that might even be a little bit low. So, the reality is we're looking at a quarterback who can offer just a little bit more on the ground, and if this offense does click in the right way, like Bo Nix has a pathway to pay off like mid to high end quarterback 2 numbers. So, that he's been a quarterback that I've been clicking as like a quarterback 2 or a quarterback 3 in my builds. And I don't think drafters should be afraid to click Bo Nix now that he's been named the starter.
Not in tournaments, again, in your home league, I'd stay away unless they're in a super flex, but in tournaments, no, man, I've been taking them all off season.
Beautiful. Well, we are going to get into our flag plants, but first we have a word about our world famous draft kit.
Hey, it's the Podfather. I have great news. The draft kit is live. It is world famous. Why? Because it is the best resource for winning fantasy football championships that exists. There are rankings and cheat sheets for every format you can imagine. We have projections both at the team level and the player level. And wherever you are, you can click on a player, open them up, and see in-depth written analysis about what to expect in fantasy football from that player this year. And then you can click on the team and you can get even more in-depth analysis, all the drivers of fantasy production, both in a positive and negative direction for that team, including a signature trend. And the graphics are incredible. So these team insights, they give you the team level projections, the vacated targets, the vacated air yards. And we added a bunch of features. I mean, individual cheat sheets for Theo and Billy and Dario. So you can take your favorite analyst and download their personal draft cheat sheet. And then in the commissioners section, Memphis Young lays out everything you need to know to manage a league, the best minds in the industry contributing analysis. It's certainly not the most inexpensive draft kit on the market, but it is the best. Playerprofiler.com/draft kit, playerprofiler.com/draft kit. Go get it.
That's right. Go get your draft kits today at playerprofiler.com. Ryan, we're planting some flags. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I'll kick us off with my first flag plant, and he's been a player that I've been flag planting since February. I was way overexposed to him, and it's been a roller coaster of an offseason with DJ Moore, because I had, I think, 40% exposure to DJ Moore in the pre-NFL draft process. And part of me is like, oh, that was a lot. But also the logic behind why I wanted DJ Moore was because we knew it was going to be Caleb Williams, number one. We were going to get a massive, massive quarterback improvement. And we saw what DJ Moore was able to do last year. He was number 10 in target share, number 8 in air yard share, 6th in receiving yards. He was good even just in yards per route run, 5th among wide receivers in yards per team pass attempt. This was a player who was putting up very, very, very good numbers. Wide receiver 9 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 6 overall in fantasy points last year with Justin Fields. So my logic for since February was he's going to get an improvement at the quarterback play. Now, did we experience, as I said, a roller coaster over the offseason? Absolutely. I was not anticipating Keenan Allen, and I was not anticipating Rome Odunze. You know, maybe they would have, but at maybe one player, one additional receiver, didn't think two. But as we look at what's been happening this offseason, there's been worries about Rome Odunze getting the snap share. It's Shane Waldron. It's JSN 2.0. Like, that's been the vibes that we're getting right now, is that even though Rome Odunze is really, really, really good, is Waldron going to employ him enough to get the snap share that's going to get the fantasy points that we want? We also have, over the last few weeks, been hearing about Fat Keenan.
Oh man.
Right? That he's just looked slow. And the report was that he was 20 pounds overweight. That was reported. And 20 pounds is not nothing, folks. So you know who has been insulated from controversy, who has been preserved? It has been DJ Moore, who is still very good. He's 27 years old. He is an alpha, and he has quarterback improvement. A lot of people say it's the cool thing to be in on Rome Odunze, or, oh, Keenan Allen has still got it. DJ Moore is the forgotten about star that you can get in your third round of your fantasy drafts, and he's going to produce. You are not going to regret drafting DJ Moore on this newly revamped Chicago Bears offense. So I am in for DJ Moore. You need to be drafting him. It's going to be beautiful when you're struggling with the Keenan Allens and you're struggling with the Rome Odunze snap shares, because Keenan Allen could just fade away into the darkness, So DJ Moore, that's not going to happen. DJ Moore plus Caleb Williams equals fantasy goodness. I'm here for it, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Moore's been a very productive player, very consistent player, like you said, and Caleb Williams is easily the best quarterback he's ever played with. So easily. So I agree with you. I've been taking him. I've been starting to take more around the 2-3 turn at times. Like end of the second round, I've taken him a few times lately. So I'm with you on that. As far as Keenan Allen, I was also not. I thought Odunze was on the table going into the draft. Months before even. I was surprised. Keenan Allen trade came out of nowhere. So I'm not sure exactly how that works out. I think he's 32, coming off the best year of his career. Like you said, Chicago's a good food town. 20 pounds overweight. It makes sense to me. I get it. I don't.
20 pounds of beard, right, Ryan?
Yeah. I wouldn't. I don't begrudge him for that at all. I think especially out of that group, I think the Bears are going to be good too, man. I think the Bears are going to be a good team, and DJ Moore is DJ Moore. So I'm with you on it.
All right, give us one of your flag plants here, Ryan.
Yeah, I've had two guys that I've talked about a lot. One, I'm not going to talk about, Josh Jacobs. I've talked about him enough. I like him above consensus. I don't think they brought him in to be Aaron Jones, but the guy I'm going to talk about is Dalton Kincaid. I'm willing to lose on that. If Dawson Knox cuts in his snap share, it is what it is. What I see in Buffalo is plain and simple. You have one of the three best quarterbacks in the league, a team that does not have a number one pass catcher, a team that doesn't even have anyone that's close to a number one pass catcher. It's very clear to me that Kincaid and James Cook are the two biggest difference-making talents they have in their skill group. They took Kincaid in the first round. When I watched Kincaid film in college, I thought he was a slot receiver. I didn't realize he was a tight end until I literally looked up his name. So I try to go in dark with everyone. I don't want to know who I'm seeing. I have a very interesting system for it, but he was brought in to be their Travis Kelce. That's obviously a lofty expectation, but again, if he led all tight ends in targets, if he led all tight ends in receptions, it wouldn't even mildly surprise me.
Yeah, the icing on the cake right now is that Curtis Samuel is still dealing with a turf toe injury, and that's going to cost him a few weeks. So just thinking about starting the season strong, if Dalton Kincaid gets a 25%, 27% target share first couple weeks, like that's not going to surprise me. And then that begins if we're going to do that, we're going to keep it that way. Sort of thing. And as you said, there's no alphas. There's no target competition. What a Khalil Shakir. Maybe Keon Coleman takes the next step, but a lot of maybes. Dalton Kincaid is the sure thing here.
It's at least the closest thing to a sure thing. It's I think I've said this to you, and specifically, Keon Coleman was brought in to essentially replace Gabe Davis. I'm not real worried about him seeing massive volume. That would surprise me. Where with Kincaid, like you said, man, 25% target share through the first month wouldn't stun me. Yeah.
I've been drafting a lot more Dalton Kincaid, especially in our tight end premium leagues, in our FFPC leagues. He's definitely a player that's been a major target at the beginning of drafts, and you can stack with Josh Allen. Like it makes sense. And I think we're both in on Josh Allen for being a top quarterback. My next flag plant is wide receiver Calvin Ridley. And I've talked about the Tennessee offense for some time. Ryan has heard me belabor this issue, but I want to get on the record that Calvin Ridley is the dude that you want. And at first, when he signed with Tennessee, I thought DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the guy. And DeAndre Hopkins still will very much be involved in this offense. He's expected to play week 1, even with the knee issue. And we've seen Hopkins tough out some of these injuries throughout his career. Like he's been on the injury report countless times, but played through it. And I think that that's what's going to happen, at the start. However, how the Tennessee Titans have approached Calvin Ridley, they paid him a lot of money, and Brian Callahan has come out and said, we want to use him in the Jamar Chase role. We want to move him around. We want him to be the focal point of the passing offense. That's what you want to hear when Calvin Ridley is the one who's getting the targets. He was misused last year when he was on Jacksonville. There was a kind of funny stat that the discrepancy between the games where Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones played together and did not play together. Ryan, I'm sure you remember that narrative that was happening. for the record, I popularized that. All of the other people were copying me. I finally felt like I was worthy of the aggregators, right? I was worthy of the aggregators for them to finally like pull up the data and say, oh, well, it's because Jacksonville was the scheme was not fitting well with Calvin Ridley. He had one of the most expected fantasy points in the NFL. Now we get Calvin Ridley with Will Levis, who has now gotten a full off season practicing. We know we've seen greatness from Will Levis before, way back in college, like before, he had the worst offensive line in college football. He was actually good at one point in college. And then now he is the guy in Tennessee. He's gotten the practice. He's gotten the confidence, the coaching staff, and they brought in the guy for Tennessee. So Calvin Ridley, who's going even later than DJ Moore. He's going, I think, round 5, round 6, much cheaper than last year. And he's poised to put up a bigger year. The Tennessee Titans are going to throw the ball a lot, and the ball is going to go to Calvin Ridley a lot. So he's one of my flag plants for this year, Ryan.
Yeah, no, you've definitely put your name on that one this year. I know the first show we ever did, I told you when we got off the air that, every time you do a show with someone new, there's at least one guy that I rethink because of their stance on him. And for me, that was Ridley. It's definitely aged well. His ADP is, I think it's risen at least a round and a half since that first show I did with you. And it makes sense too. If Tennessee is going to be more pass voluminous, more modern offensively, he's probably going to be the primary beneficiary, even when Hopkins returns. So I have much more of him than I did beforehand because of you, almost entirely.
Well, Ryan, we will get your next flag plant. Also, we'll stay in wide receiver zone here. Tell us about your second flag plant.
Yeah, especially in full PPR leagues, I feel like Deontay Johnson's essentially the cliff in a lot of formats, where it's like if you need a wide receiver 3, he's pretty much the last guy you can get where it's like this guy's a chance to be the runaway alpha on his team. Like JSN's an interesting option. Brian Thomas is an interesting dart throw. But like, again, those are what if guys. Deontay Johnson was brought in to basically help resurrect Bryce Young's young career. And, he's always been a volume monster. I like the situation. Half PPR, I like him less because he's not really a red zone real red zone threat. But if you're looking for stability at wide receiver 3 on certain builds, he's literally the cliff for me.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson right now on Underdog Fantasy going wide receiver 39 behind Roma Dunze and Chris Godwin, ahead of Christian Watson and Hollywood Brown now. So you're getting him at the end of round 6. That's about where you're going to get Deontay Johnson. And by that time, you're probably at wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 land. That's what we're looking. We've seen 3 straight seasons of Deontay Johnson's career where he earned 140 or more targets. So he has been a target hog in the past. And if we believe the narrative that Dave Canales is the quarterback whisperer, that Bryce Young is going to take a step forward, who is going to be the target hog? Deontay Johnson has shown that. Jonathan Mingo hasn't shown that. Xavier Legette, the profile, I don't think fits that. There are other receiving pieces on this offense, but I don't think they're going to get close to that talent of Deontay Johnson. So I like that flag plant for you there, Ryan.
Well, I'm glad we're aligned on it, man. Christian Watson in tournaments, especially, I like him too. I like a few guys in that range, but Johnson, man, again, in that range, he's probably the only dude in that range that has a shot at being top 5 in the league in targets, I'd say.
It's very
yeah, it's shot. I don't think it's going to happen, but he has a shot. Christian Watson doesn't,
No, Christian Watson's not going to get the targets, but he might have the 3 touchdown game.
Yeah, right. For sure.
Which is great for your best ball tournaments.
Yeah.
But Deontay Johnson, also a player we should be considering in our redraft leagues because of the consistency. Like, targets offer a lot more consistency than our spike week and best ball brethren want to be targeting. All right, Ryan. So to cap it off for those who are just tuning in, we offered flag plants. I offered 2 flag plants, DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley. Ryan offered Dalton Kincaid and Deontay Johnson. So just review the last few minutes if you want to rewind and check those out. We're now going to shift into 3 sleepers each that we're targeting. And Ryan and I looked at FFPC ADP round 11 or later. And some of these players are, very common among those who have been in the fantasy football, who have been doing fantasy for the whole off season. But if you are just getting into it over the last month, maybe the last couple weeks, maybe someone is elbowing you and saying, hey, join my league. Who are some late guys that I should be putting my eye on? These guys are going to be players that Ryan and I are both saying, we want you to be getting some of these guys because they will offer some fantasy goodness. Their upside is significantly higher than where their ADP is going, and they can be consistent fantasy contributors for you throughout the season that may be overlooked by others. I'll start off with wide receiver for the New England Patriots, 2nd round pick, Jaylen Polk. Jaylen Polk, we like the draft capital. We like what he did at Washington, 22 years old, a player that put up a pretty good combine, good athleticism. His player profiler comp is Romeo Doubs. So he's going to be an every down starter. The New England Patriots have looked at their offense, and it's been consistently from all of the beat writers, Jaylen Polk with team 1, Jaylen Polk's with the starters. And Jaylen Polk is 6'1", 203. He can work anywhere, but look, are you going to, if you're looking at the Patriots and saying, okay, who am I going to attack for fantasy? Is it Demario Douglas or is it Jaylen Polk from wide receiver? You should be attacking Jaylen Polk. The upside is significantly higher there. Demario Douglas, to compare, had one of the lowest standard deviations last season among wide receivers in terms of fantasy points. And so he was not getting you any spike weeks. He was consistently like 8 points, 9 points, 10 points. Yes, he was getting some targets, but Jaylen Polk now is picked by this new head coach, picked to pair up with either Jacoby Brissett or, future Drake May. The profile is there. The opportunity is there. Everything is aligning for Jaylen Polk to pay off. And let's see, I didn't pull up the exact ADP, but it's looking like round 14 ADP. So even as you're getting later, this is a player that you should be considering round 14.
Yeah, I get it. I like it. There's definitely upside there. I will say this. I do not think losing Bill Belichick is going to be a positive thing for the New England Patriots long term. No, generally speaking, when you lose a Hall of Fame head coach, not to mention probably the best one ever, it's going to be a downgrade. They have a brutal roster, but they're going to be playing from behind. That defense is not going to be what it was, or has been rather. And, again, when I look at Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas, it's like, okay, that's not exactly an insurmountable group to rise to the top, especially late in the year or in money-making season. So if you're in a tournament, especially, I dig it. I like it.
All right, Ryan, hit us with your first sleeper here.
I'm not sure sleeper is the right word for him. I think he's on the borderline. You gave me a round 11, break off. We didn't want to talk about Blake Corum. We've talked about Blake Corum enough.
I almost picked Blake Corum to be like that, but
yeah, exactly. I'm going to talk about Rico Dowdle a little bit because, I've watched every snap of every game since 2014. I do that because I bet a pretty substantial amount of money on football. And several times in the second half of last year, I thought Dowdle was Pollard. So, that's usually a good sign. Explosive runner, similar type runner. Again, Pollard was, hampered coming off his leg injury a little bit. But I think what they're thinking here is Ezekiel Elliott, the corpse of Ezekiel Elliott's going to fill the old Ezekiel Elliott role when Pollard was there. And Dowdle's essentially going to be Pollard. So not exactly the high octane group that was 3 years ago with those two guys, but I think the strategy is similar. I could see Dowdle having some pretty good games, especially if Elliott misses time.
I'm with you there. Rico Dowdle. Are you ready for a story, Ryan? Have
Sure.
I told you the story? It's
I don't think
how
so.
I got with Player Profiler. So I had been doing some like podcasting podcast partnerships with Player Profile. Shout out to Theo Greminger for work and Billy Muzio for working with me and getting that set up. But over last summer, I went out to Connecticut for a family vacation, and I messaged Matt Kelly and I said, "Hey, Matt, I'm in Connecticut. I know you live in Connecticut. Do you want to get together for one night?" And he's like, "Sure." So we got together at the Podfathers mansion, the fantasy mansion itself. I've been there. It's
Nice.
a phenomenal place. Matt was a great host. And we spent some time, by the fire outside talking fantasy. And one of the things I dropped on him was, it's not Malik Davis. It was Rico Dowdle, who was the RB2 at the time. And Matt was like, "Wait, how do you know this?" And I said, "Well, I've had my, ear to the beat writers. I've been listening very closely, and it's been Rico Dowdle who's winning this job as the RB2 behind Tony Pollard." And Matt was like, "Oh, wow, okay, so we need to definitely change our ranks." I said, "Yeah, we should definitely change the ranks on Rico Dowdle." And so a couple of weeks later, he calls me up and says, "Hey, Bradley, that was such a great tidbit. Do you want to run the news desk for Player Profiler?" And I said, "That sounds great." So that is how I became. Rico Dowdle and I have a special connection, Ryan. He's a player near and dear to my heart. And I'll just add one thing in terms of the analysis with Rico Dowdle. We know what Ezekiel Elliott is. You mentioned he is the corpse. We know he has no juice.
Yeah.
What we don't know is if Rico Dowdle has that long-term sustained juice. We don't know, but he might. And that's why it's an intriguing play, because you have the Dallas Cowboys offense with someone who might have the massive upside and had shown some sprinkles here and there. Okay. So I like the Rico Dowdle call there.
There's a path. That's a great story. Matt's I've talked to Matt a few times about business and stuff, and that doesn't surprise me that he saw them like, okay, you pulled that. I want more of this guy. I like that. Great story.
Shout out to Johnny Tuma. Yes, it is a legendary legendary story. I'll transition to my next sleeper pick. And this is a player that Emerson Beery, who is one of the dynasty analysts for Player Profiler, came on during the pre-combine process and said that Braelon Allen was his RB1 in the class. And I don't know if I agreed with that necessarily, but it was intriguing that he was interested in Braelon Allen. And Allen just towers over these other players. And it was a shame that he didn't get the draft capital that we wanted. However, the drum beat has been so consistent that Braelon Allen is the RB2 for the New York Jets. And we love Breece Hall. We love Breece Hall. I think the Breece Hall is he's in that big three. I think that's, it's clear that he deserves to be in that big three and is a tier ahead of the Gibbs Achane tier. But Braelon Allen is oftentimes getting forgotten at the end of drafts in terms of who are the handcuffs. The Algiers are popular, right? Looking at a few other ones that are very popular, like Zach Charbonnet is very expensive. Trey Benson, very expensive. Ty Chandler, very expensive. Braelon Allen is a few rounds later, but has the same upside as these other guys. He's looked very good in the preseason. The coaches are singing his praises. They are even saying, well, he can catch passes too. I don't know if he can catch passes, more of like a Ken Walker mold than anything. But this is a player that we want to be considering much later, given the upside. And if Breece Hall's going in the first round, the opportunity is there. And if the Jets will jet, which we have organizational questions of whether they're actually going to, give Breece Hall all of the work. They drafted Braelon Allen for a reason, and he's looked very good. So I think what we want to do is consider Braelon Allen as one of those also in that same tier of Trey Benson, of Tyler Algier, of Zach Charbonnet. And we can wait a few rounds and take that type of player with similar upside. So one of the sleepers there. I know he's, technically going to still be a handcuff. However, I want us to not forget about Braelon Allen, given what he did in college and what he could do here, even chipping away maybe some goal line work for New York.
Yeah, I live in Jets country. Been nothing but positive things said about him all August. And, I've said this a number of times, especially with veteran quarterbacks that aren't, like Lamar Jackson. You don't have to worry about it so much. But with Aaron Rodgers, especially coming off his injury, you need running backs who are going to block. I usually refrain away from rookies with this. But when you look at their depth chart, there's no one behind Breece Hall. Isaiah Davis, also a rookie. Apanaconda, second-year player. They're talking about cutting him. So
yep.
I think he's the best player of that group. I love your stance. I've been taking more of him lately myself.
Yeah, he's been a player that has sometimes disappeared even in the DK streets. Like what? How can you forget about Braelon Allen? I don't know. He's definitely a player that I wish had landed maybe somewhere else in terms of opportunity, at least immediate opportunity. It's clear that Breece Hall is the number one. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get much from him in terms of that. But Braelon Allen, I'm here for him being one of those deeper sleepers. Ryan, give us your second sleeper.
Yeah, in the same vein, you should have injury away running backs on your team, even if you're in a home league. That's there should be a spot or two on your roster fit for those guys. Tank Bigsby's free. I completely faded him last year. I never thought he was a relevant talent. I comped him Alexander Madison. That hasn't changed at all. But again, at cost, last year going in the 12th, 13th, 14th round, no thank you. Now in the 17th or 18th, that's an offense with a solid offensive line, a good quarterback, and no running back depth chart behind Travis Etienne. Etienne goes down. Bigsby's going to be the top waiver wire ad sometime this year. So I'm taking him in the late rounds all the time.
Yeah, at first in the offseason, I wasn't taking him at all, given how bad he did last year. He was terribly. He was arguably the worst running back in the NFL in terms of certain efficiency metrics. However, the coaching staff challenged him to improve, and it seems like he has responded positively from all of the camp reports that we've been hearing lately. That he is clearly the RB2 still. He's pushed off some big runs. So I agree. Tank Bigsby is now back on that handcuff radar.
Yeah, plain and simple. There's nothing sexy about it, Bradley. He's just, he's a guy that if the starter goes down, he's going to play, man. He is.
All right, we will conclude my sleepers with giving two of them. One is kind of a cheating one, and one is the real sleeper. Taysom Hill, we need to be drafting Taysom Hill everywhere. Unless he is a firm quarterback position in your league, you need to be drafting him. Sleeper, he's dual eligible. On drafters, he's tight end eligible. On DraftKings, he's tight end eligible. On FFPC, he is technically still a quarterback, but we have seen FFPC change Taysom Hill's position due to depth chart releases. And it was about this time last year that the final depth chart was released for the New Orleans Saints, and the FFPC changed Taysom Hill's positional allocation. And so we need to be drafting Taysom Hill. In fact, the beat reporter, one of the beat reporters just today said that it wouldn't surprise him if not only Taysom Hill was the number 2, but that he was the number 1 rushing option on the Saints, even ahead of Kamara, which was wild to me that even that was being said. But he said that Taysom Hill was running as the running backs were. And so you have to wonder, what is Taysom Hill's position going to be? And if there is any tight end eligibility for Taysom Hill, you need to be taking Taysom Hill, Ryan. There is no excuse. It is inexcusable if he has tight end eligibility for him to not be drafted.
Over the last few years, I think Taysom Hill's tight end eligibility has been my least favorite thing in fantasy. But you're absolutely not wrong. The rules are the rules. You got to do it. If you want to make any money, especially in tournaments, you have to have some exposure to him for sure. Totally agree.
Yes. So Taysom Hill exposure, very, very high. The real sleeper here is Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson, the wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. Things got lost last year, right? Um, Hollywood Brown was injured off and on. Trey McBride was coming into his own. And I'm pretty sure Michael Wilson was dealing with injuries himself throughout the season. But if we look at what Michael Wilson was able to do last year for the Arizona Cardinals, it might surprise you. This was a player who was a 3rd round pick. Yes, he finished like wide receiver 57, but as a rookie, 565 receiving yards in 13 games. That's okay. We can work with that. We can work with a player like that. He was certainly, a top 15 wide receiver in terms of yards per target. His true catch rate was top 15. Target premium was 6th among all wide receivers. Production premium was extremely high. And we look at like his game log from last year. We saw a wide receiver 6 overall finish. We saw multiple top 24 finishes. And this is a guy who was just getting his feet wet to start. And now like he was picking it up near the end of the season, finally coming into his. Kyler Murray is now fully healthy. He's now protected by Marvin Harrison being in this offense. This is a player that a median target share of 17% last year. He can take the next step and become a 20% wide receiver in a what we anticipate to be a pretty good offense for Arizona. So with how late he is going, Michael Wilson is a strong consideration for one of those late sleepers that can get you some pretty consistent fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, Kyler Murray is an MVP caliber quarterback. And like you said, Greg Dortch is one of those guys that always confuses me. I don't know how he's been as efficient as. Every time I watch him, like, I don't get it. But, there's an opportunity for a guy like Wilson to, like you said, he emerges as the 3rd or 4th option in this offense. Oddly enough, like Zay Jones is a Cardinal, so that's not why I'm making this comparison. But like he could be what Zay Jones was to Jacksonville, where every once in a while this guy has like a 10-catch game, So again, once in tournaments, I like him too.
All right, Ryan, hit us with your final sleeper.
So this is a tournament-only thing, probably even best ball only, but Darnell Mooney is playing with the best quarterback he's ever played with by miles and miles and miles with Kirk Cousins this year. He's not going to be the focal point of the offense, but he's a deep threat. He's a guy who can get you a 50-yard touchdown on a stop and go. Good offense, especially with the Falcons. Their first 3 games are tough. They play the Steelers, they play the Eagles, they play the Chiefs. Then after that, the only game for the rest of the season where they might not be favored is a home game in Week 9 against Dallas. Falcons are going to be, as long as Kirk Cousins recovers from his Achilles injury and doesn't get caught by Father Time, Falcons are going to have a pretty good offense, and Darnell Mooney's going to have a couple games this year.
Okay, Ryan, let's take a step back. I love the Darnell Mooney call for especially best ball leagues. You're getting your shots. He's won big down the field before. We saw that in Chicago. He looks to be healthy from the injuries he had suffered earlier. Rondell Moore is now out for the year with a knee injury. He's not going to be pushed for that wide receiver 2 spot. Casey Washington isn't a thing. But what do you make of Michael Penix intentionally not playing in the preseason? Is this a nothing burger? Is this a something burger? How are you interpreting the Atlanta Falcons benching Michael Penix, who, you've got a 1st round quarterback who needs some reps in the NFL? Like you're saying, you've seen all you need to see. Is that telling us something?
Yeah, no, that is. It's interesting. Even if he does play early on, I don't think he'd play for the whole year. But see, that's the thing that's strange about it is if they're going to open the season with Michael Penix because Cousins isn't ready, what are they going to do with Cousins when he comes back? Well, you're going to have a guy making $50 million a year sitting on the bench. That's a wild situation to me. I think Cousins said he expects to be ready, but yeah, man, you definitely, that's definitely raises some eyebrows, so to speak.
My eyebrows, my very black eyebrows are heavily raised toward the Michael Penix situation. I've been taking a little bit more of him, in the late rounds, last rounds. If I want a 3rd quarterback in my build, If I've taken some Falcons or some Washington players, I believe they have the Week 17 matchup together. But at any rate, Michael Penix is a player now on the radar. I like the Darnell Mooney best ball call in the tournaments. Certainly interesting. And those are our sleepers. Just so to recap for everybody, my 3 sleepers were Jaylen Polk, Braelon Allen, Taysom Hill / Michael Wilson, and Ryan gave us Rico Dowdle, Tank Bigsby, and Darnell Mooney. Well, guys, it's been great. Seeing all the chat blowing up. It's been a lot of fun hanging out with y'all. Ryan and I, this was our second August podcast. Once we get into September and the season is starting, we'll be going weekly. So make sure you're tuning into Man versus Machine, where Ryan Reynolds and I will be giving you the fantasy advice that you need to win your lineup each week in preparation for the Thursday, the Sunday slate, the Monday games. Heck, we're going to have a Friday. I think it's a Friday game, right? The Green Bay Packers take on the Philadelphia Eagles. It's going to be wild. I was telling my folks, because they're all Green. I'm Green Bay Packers. We're all Green Bay Packers fans in the Stalder household. I was telling them like they're going to be playing in Brazil, and my dad is like, "Well, who's the home team?" You know.
Yeah, who takes it on the chin there?
Who's losing out on stadium money, and apparel and whatnot. But it's going to be very exciting coming up for us here in a couple weeks. So make sure you're tuning in to Man versus Machine. We'll be recording and going live Wednesdays, 9 p.m. So especially when we get into close to the start of the season and throughout the season, we expect some start sits. If you want to prioritize your start sit questions as well, throw some, we'll prioritize those who are paying in the chat. So use the super chats because we love answering them. You'll get Ryan's perspective from, an NFL analyst and betting analyst perspective, and also fantasy. And you'll get my rankings as well as I get prepared, or at least like general rankings. I usually finalize the Thursday ones for Thursday and Sunday on Sunday, but you get general vibes and make those decisions, at least in a first iteration, go through about Wednesday. So that's what you can expect from Ryan and myself as we're going into the season. Any words for the people, Ryan, before we sign off for the night?
We're almost there, man. Chiefs, Ravens, couple weeks. Looking forward to it myself, man. Looking forward.
It's going to be so great. So great. All right. On behalf of Ryan, I am Bradley, and you have been watching Man versus Machine. Until next time, good luck in the fantasy football streets, and good luck in your fantasy drafts if you're drafting this weekend.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.